Adding analytics to your app can seem like a simple and obvious thing to do, but once you start to get into it, it can be a little confusing. For example, what type of data do you track and how much of it? A common approach is to track as much data as possible because maybe you'll need it in the future. I think this is a bad strategy. You're better off being much more intentional about the data you're collecting and why you're collecting it. This is because the data you collect can become a liability for you. In this video, I'm going to be sharing an easy framework that I use to make analytics a lot more useful in your app and some of the dangers of analytics and things you should be mindful of. I also have a free Notion template I'll be sharing at the end of this video, so stick around. Now, before we get into the framework, let's talk about deciding what to track. There's common things you're going to want to track, and then there's things that are more specific to your app and business that you're going to want to track. Now, for the common things, this is stuff like the version and build number of your app, the OS and the device that people are using, the general region that people are located in, number of active users, that kind of stuff. And depending on the analytics service that you use, that stuff might be tracked automatically. Now, the things that are specific to your app and business are going to require a little more thought and a little more time for you to kind of put that stuff together. So for example, do you want to track the conversion rate of your pricing page, the use of specific features in your app, or even the path that users may take to get to certain key screens in your app? Now let's talk about the framework that I use to add analytics to my app. So for each thing that I want to track, I will ask myself a few simple questions. The first is, what do I want to know? So think about your product, your app, your customers, and the things that you want to know about it, or maybe need to know about it, or are curious about. Those are the big questions that you want to answer. The second is, how am I going to use the information that I'm collecting? Am I going to use this to inform future business or feature decisions? Will this information give me a better understanding of how the product is used? Or am I just curious about this general question? The next question is, what would happen if I didn't have this information? Will I be worse off in some way? Will I not be able to make good decisions, or at least more informed decisions? And will this put me at some kind of disadvantage in some way? Now, the last question, and probably the most important question, is what are my blind spots with this data? The major danger in collecting analytics data is the bad assumptions that you can end up making. Analytics alone cannot answer every question that you have. And just because something is plotted on a chart doesn't make it correct. So that's the general framework I follow when adding analytics to my app. But let's get into some practical examples so you can see how to put it into practice. Okay, so I'm gonna run through a few examples of how I've used this framework when adding analytics to Sofa. I'll also be providing a link to this free Notion template in the description below. One of the things I track in Sofa is the different data types. So in Sofa, you can add movies, books, TV shows, video games, all that kind of stuff into Sofa. And basically, I wanna know, like, what's the distribution of those different data types? So again, we have these 4 simple questions that I run through for each one of these. So let's actually do this. So again, what do I want to know? I want to know the ratio of the different data types that people are adding into Sofa. So this is books versus movies versus video games, all those things. So when it comes to how I'll use this information, so the thought with this is maybe I will build specific features related to those specific types of information. The second thing is, if one of those data types goes away, which it did recently with board games, what is the impact of that happening? So knowing the ratio of that is going to be very useful for the types of decisions that I make if things change in terms of the service providers that I have access to when it comes to all this different data. Now, what would happen if I didn't have this information? So essentially, I would just have to make some educated guesses at the most popular types of data that people add to Sofa. For the data that's in there now, that actually might be fairly easy to do. As those things grow, and I'm working on some new features where you'll be able to add any type of data to Sofa, that's going to be much harder to scale, and I'm not going to be able to just make guesses about that. So it wouldn't be the worst if I didn't have this information, but I would be at some kind of disadvantage here. Now, in terms of my blind spots with this information will not tell me why, say, video games is more popular than board games, or movies is more popular than books. Like, it won't tell me those things. It won't tell me why those things are happening. It just tells me the raw information that more people add this versus that. All right, so that's one metric, different data types, and the general questions that I kind of run through here. Now, this next one is going to be the conversion rate of the pricing page. So Sofa is mostly free, but there is an upgraded tier called Super Sofa, and I have a pricing page for that, and I essentially want to track the conversion rate of people who look at that page versus actually subscribing and upgrading to the Super Sofa plan. Basically, I want to know the conversion rate of people who have viewed the upgrade screen versus those who actually subscribe. Now, how I'll use this information. So first, I'll get a baseline for how my pricing page is currently performing. That's helpful for making future decisions on, because how's it doing now? And second, I'll know if my pricing page is performing well or poorly. I'll be able to look at, kind of industry benchmarks. And that can vary from business to business because not everything is equal, but it can give me some kind of ballpark if, my pricing page is performing okay. Is it overperforming or is it underperforming? So if I didn't have this information, I wouldn't know how my pricing page is performing, and I wouldn't know if there was a problem that really needed to be fixed. So this is kind of an important one that I would say if you have a pricing page and you need to add any kind of analytics and tracking, this is probably the biggest priority one to do. My blind spots with this data is going to be pretty big. Whether someone converts or doesn't, I have no idea why. Is it the price? Were they confused about the features they were getting? Were they not interested in those features? And why were they not interested in those features? Did they get distracted by something and leave the app and forget to come back? Like, there's so many different scenarios that can happen here. And it's important to know that these metrics will not help me answer all of these questions. I need to follow this up with some other stuff. So this last one is the use of a specific feature inside of Sofa, and that is the sticky notes feature. Really what I want to know here is very simple. I want to know, are people using this feature and how often are they using this feature? So in terms of how I'll use this information, because this is going to be pretty basic. So basically when I made this feature, my assumption was that it was going to be useful. And knowing if a feature is used is one indicator that may suggest that it is useful. It doesn't actually mean it's useful, but it's one indicator that can show that it is useful. The other thing is, a lot of times when I release features, they're kind of like the version 1 of a specific feature, and there's much more work and investment that can go into it to make it much more robust, much more powerful, all those kinds of things. And knowing if a certain feature is used and then following up with why it's being used and the problem it's solving is this feature worth investing more time in and developing further to add more power to, more features to, whatever that is. And that's really why I would want to collect this kind of information. And what would happen if I didn't have this information? I just simply wouldn't know if the feature was being used. I could ask people, oh, are you using this and that kind of thing. But, that gives you that anecdotal evidence, which you definitely need to complement all of this. But it doesn't give me a kind of a broader, just kind of a sterile analysis like, is this feature being used or not? The blind spots with tracking feature use are very large, and this is going to be true of any feature, because really how much or little it's being used, it doesn't indicate how satisfied people are with that specific feature. There can be features that are used all the time, but maybe people hate using them. So I'm going to need to have conversations with people to learn more about what's working well, what needs to be improved, and all those kinds of things. So hopefully seeing these tangible examples are useful and helpful in seeing how you can actually apply this for yourself and for your own app. What's really nice about just this small set of questions is it really makes you intentionally add this stuff to your app, not just blanket capture as much data as possible. It's really making you think through, well, what information do I need? Why do I need it? How am I going to use it? And that actually limits the amount of data that you collect from people, which is good. So hopefully this was helpful. I want to talk a little bit about the dangers of analytics because I think they can be overvalued a lot. So analytics are quantitative data, which means it's data that can be tracked and measured and counted and turned into numerical values of some kind. This means that analytics can tell you what happened, but they cannot tell you why it happened. This is an incredibly important distinction to make when you're using analytics to make decisions in the future. Just because you know that something happened doesn't mean you understand why it happened. That's why it's so important to supplement your quantitative data, so your analytics, with qualitative data, which is just talking to customers. Let me give you an actual example of how I plan to combine quantitative and qualitative information for Sofa. So currently I track the conversion rate of people upgrading to Super Sofa. Super Sofa is like the pro version of Sofa. Now I recently made some major design changes to the Super Sofa pricing page, and I want to understand the impact of those changes. So first I'm going to use analytics to track if my conversion rate is going up, down, or staying the same. So again, that's going to tell me what is happening. Are things getting better? Are they getting worse? Are they staying the same? But at that point, I don't know why. I don't know why they're getting better. I don't know why they're getting worse or why they're just not changing at all. This is when I'll follow it up with talking with actual customers. And there's two groups of people that I would want to talk to. I'd want to talk to people who saw the new pricing page and decided to subscribe. I want to understand what drove them to subscribe, what on the pricing page led them there. How did they get there even before all this? How did they hear about it? All that stuff. And then more importantly, I want to talk to the people who looked at the pricing page and then didn't subscribe. Did they not understand what they were getting? Were the features not clear? Did they not care? Did they not see the value in what they were getting? Was the price not good? That kind of thing. And talking to those two segments, I can get a much more well-rounded picture of not only what happened on the pricing page, but why it happened. So again, pairing your quantitative data with qualitative data is something you should be doing all the time. So that's my general approach to handling analytics and thinking about analytics and quantitative data, qualitative data, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully you found this useful and interesting, and hopefully you can take something away and apply it to your app or your product. Again, if you're interested in that free Notion template, there is a link in the description. So that's it for me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.